It happened in a small corner of Kerala in 2015. No breaking news alerts, no camera crews, just the soft rustle of palm trees, and the kind of silence that hides things. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that makes you pause and wonder, what's really going on behind that closed door? She was born in 2001, a young lad with a tender mind, a quiet laugh, and a world that didn't always make sense to her. She wasn't like the others, and for that, she was often overlooked, invisible, misunderstood. But she noticed everything. She felt it all, and when her world shifted, no one heard the crack until it was too late. This isn't just a story of cruelty. It's a story about trust twisted into betrayal, about a family trying to protect someone they loved, and about a society that too often looks the other way until it can't anymore. She didn't have the words to cry out, but someone noticed, and that changed everything. What happens next isn't easy to hear, but it's the kind of story that needs to be told, because behind every statistic there's a name, and behind every name, a life worth protecting. This is the story of Asha's silence. Welcome to the crime series. I am glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. Asha was born into the family of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, ordinary people held together by faith, fatigue, and a fierce love for their ward. Mr. Thomas Singh worked as a mechanic in a small auto workshop near town. He wasn't formally educated, but he believed in providing. His hands were always stained with grease, his shirts faded with time, but he came home every evening with something, a sweet bun for the kids, a boiled egg for his wife, or just stories that made them laugh. Mrs. Mary Singh was the quieter strength. Gentle in speech, tireless in effort. She juggled jobs, first in a cashew factory, then cleaning homes, then taking on laundry from wealthier neighborhoods. Eventually, she found steady work as a housemaid. It paid just enough to keep the lights on and the roof from leaking. They had 3 daughters. 2 of them, by all appearances, were like the other ward in the neighborhood. But Asha, their second child, was different. She was diagnosed early with autism, though in her community, the word was rarely used. People called her slow or not quite right. She didn't speak much. When she did, her words came out in fragments. Loud noises overwhelmed her. Eye contact was difficult, but she had a heart that danced to rhythm, songs, colors, stories. And when she laughed, it was unfiltered and pure, like something sacred had passed through her. But not everyone saw that side of her. As the years passed, the gap between Asha and the world only widened. Autism had shaped the way she connected with people. Quietly, differently. She often flinched at sudden sounds. Her hands fluttered when she was overwhelmed. Her eyes would dart around the room, rarely locking with anyone else's. Words didn't come easily. When they did, they arrived out of order, gentle fragments that made sense to her but left others confused. She found comfort in repetition, in lining up small stones, in tracing her fingers over the textured corners of fabric, in spinning, slow, rhythmic spinning that seemed to calm whatever storm lived inside her. But the world didn't understand. The neighborhood children teased her at first. They mimicked her hand movements, laughed when she spoke in broken sentences. And when they didn't mock, they simply ignored. Over time, she stopped trying. She'd walk to the edge of the playground, then quietly turn away. She began to hum to herself more, small wordless melodies only she seemed to know. Ribbons, bottle caps, bits of thread, these became her toys. The world she built for herself was quieter, but it was safe. Her isolation wasn't loud. It was subtle, like a curtain slowly being drawn. Her older sister Anjali was born in 1999, protective, observant. There was love in her heart, but she was also at an age where she was discovering her own path. School, friends, the budding rush of adolescence. There were moments when she simply didn't know how to make space for Asha's silence. She tried, though. When she noticed Asha sitting alone, she'd bring her a small snack or a story from school. She watched more than she spoke. She worried. Priya, the youngest, was born in 2006. Bright, bubbly, still wide-eyed with wonder. To her, the world was one long game of pretend. She loved her sister too, in the pure, unfiltered way that only younger children can. But she didn't understand why Asha didn't want to play tag or dress up or laugh at her silly impressions. Sometimes she got frustrated and walked away. Then a few minutes later, she'd come back and sit quietly next to her sister, offering a piece of candy or a crayon. No words, just presence. They loved her, truly. But they were children. And like many children faced with a sibling who moves differently through the world, they often didn't know what to do with that love. So they loved her imperfectly. Sometimes they ran ahead and forgot to look back. And then, the unthinkable happened. It was a monsoon evening, wet, chaotic, like many others. Mr. Thomas Singh was on his way home from work, umbrella in hand, when he collapsed near the station. A sudden cardiac arrest. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. By the time a few strangers rushed to help, it was too late. He was gone. The foundation of the family cracked that day. And for Mary Singh, the real struggle began. She was now a widow, alone, with 3 daughters, one with special needs. The days blurred into each other. More homes to clean, more floors to scrub, more aching returns late at night. She never complained, but you could see it in her gait, in the way she pressed her palms against her back at the end of the day. Still, she prayed. She hoped. She believed, even if dimly, that her daughters would somehow have a life better than hers. But what she didn't know was that while she was out battling poverty, an even darker shadow was beginning to circle her home. Something she could not sweep away. Something that didn't knock. It was waiting for a moment when no one was looking. That shadow came in the form of a man in their neighborhood. He was the one everyone waved to, out of habit, not friendship. The one who always seemed to be there when things went wrong, who always knew just what to say and when to say it. For the Singh family, that man was Mr. Ramesh. He lived just 2 houses down the narrow lane. Early 40s, wiry build, thick mustache, a calm, steady voice that rarely changed, even when it should have. He wasn't a Christian like the Singhs. He followed another religion, one of many that stitched India's patchwork of faiths. But in that neighborhood, everyone lived like one people. Faith wasn't always spoken, but kindness was shared. Mr. Ramesh had lived there longer than most. He was married. His wife, Latha, had been battling a chronic illness for years. She was rarely seen outside. His 2 sons had gone off to college, one after the other, just a year apart, both bright and promising, now studying in a city several hours away. Ramesh was often alone. To the community, he was the helpful uncle, the man who never missed a church harvest, even though he didn't attend service. The one who showed up with banana chips and masala peanuts for the neighborhood children. The one who fixed leaky taps, helped elderly neighbors carry gas cylinders, and repaired broken gates, never once asking for money. But there was another side to him. A side that watched, listened, calculated. He had an eye for people's vulnerabilities. He noticed the cracks in their routines, the quiet places where life got too loud. And that's where he slipped in. After Thomas Singh passed away, Mary had no choice but to stretch herself thin. Up at 4 a.m., out the door before the sun rose, home again long after it set. She scrubbed floors in 5 different homes, sometimes more. On some days, she didn't even see her daughters awake. She was doing what she could to survive, to protect, to provide. But survival has a cost, and Ramesh saw it. He began small, a smile here, a greeting there. He'd meet the girls on their way to school, offer to carry their water from the public tap, fix the latch on their front door when it jammed during the rains. He started saying things that sounded like concern. "You shouldn't leave them alone too long," he told Mary one morning. "Especially the middle one," he added, nodding toward Asha. "The world isn't always kind." He offered to check on them when she was out, just to make sure they've eaten. Nothing more. He never pushed. He made himself useful, present, safe, and slowly he became a fixture. When Asha wandered too far from home, he'd bring her back. If the power cut out during the evening rains, he'd come over with a candle. If Priya scraped her knee, he'd fetch cotton and antiseptic. Always appearing at just the right moment. And no one questioned it, because in the eyes of the neighborhood, Mr. Ramesh was a good man. A kind man. The sort of neighbor every struggling widow would be lucky to have. But behind that calm demeanor, something darker was growing. He paid special attention to Asha. He learned her habits, He watched her carefully, the way she moved, what made her smile. He discovered what sweets she liked: jalebi, orange-flavored toffee, banana chips dusted with sugar. He spoke to her softly, never rushed her, said she was special, told her she didn't have to speak if she didn't want to. "I understand you anyway," he whispered. And for a girl like Asha, who was used to being ignored, misunderstood, or teased, that kind of attention felt like a miracle. She began to trust him, completely. She'd wait near his gate, accept the sweets, laugh at his silly impressions. And sometimes, when her mother was out working and the house felt empty, she'd go with him to the back of his compound where he kept an old one-room extension. A dusty place with a plastic mat, an old radio, and shelves stacked with comic books and newspapers. He called it his reading corner. No one asked questions. Not at first. To the outside world, it was harmless, innocent. Mr. Ramesh was helping. Mr. Ramesh was kind. But what they didn't see was how meticulously he had studied her, how he had worn down her defenses, how he had turned trust into control. He was grooming her, quietly, intentionally. And it wasn't long before the lines began to blur, before kindness turned into something else, before the mask slipped just enough. But by then, it was too late. Mrs. Mary Singh, still occupied with long hours of domestic labor and caregiving work, was unaware of what had been unfolding just a few houses down from her own. She continued to rely on Mr. Ramesh and other neighbors to look after her children whenever her evening shifts extended past sundown. To her, he appeared to be a supportive neighbor, a man who filled the gap left by her husband's sudden death and her own inability to be physically present at all times. She didn't realize that the person she had come to depend on had been exploiting her trust. And on that quiet residential street in Kerala, as life went on as usual, a secret had begun to grow unnoticed, hidden in plain sight. At the time, Anjali Singh, Asha's older sister, was returning from a visit with her school friends when she noticed something unusual. She was standing near the corner shop when she saw Asha exiting the narrow side entrance of Mr. Ramesh's one-room extension. Asha's behavior immediately caught her attention. She wasn't walking at her usual pace. She appeared distressed, visibly shaken. Her head was slightly lowered, her hands clenched at her sides. Silent tears ran down her cheeks. There was no visible injury, no verbal outburst, but her body language suggested something had deeply unsettled her. Anjali also noticed the condition of Asha's clothing. Her simple cotton dress, faded from use, had a tear near the hem and visible reddish stains on the front. Initially, Anjali assumed it might be from a fall or a minor accident. But the more she observed, the more she sensed that this wasn't typical behavior for her younger sister. Witnesses later confirmed that Asha did not cry aloud or raise any alarm. She simply walked home, her expression blank, her demeanor unusually withdrawn. Concerned, Anjali immediately followed her home, leaving her friends behind. She stated during a later interview that she couldn't explain why, but something about the way Asha looked didn't sit right. At that point in time, Asha had not fully understood what had happened to her. According to later psychological evaluations, she expressed discomfort with the incident, but was unable to articulate it clearly. Her autistic traits, particularly her difficulty with sensory input, abstract language, and recognizing inappropriate boundaries, made it harder for her to describe or process the encounter in a way that adults could immediately understand. Anjali, who had followed her sister home, immediately began asking her a series of simple, direct questions. Asha couldn't explain verbally what had happened. Her speech was limited, and the confusion in her eyes suggested she didn't fully grasp the nature of what she had just experienced. But her reactions were telling. She nodded slowly in response to some of the questions, hesitated at others, and looked away when asked about Mr. Ramesh. If you found this story compelling and appreciate the way we bring real-life cases to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth and share these important stories. Like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Anjali didn't need a full explanation to understand what had likely taken place. The state of Asha's clothing, her behavior, and her sudden fear all pointed to one thing. Anjali waited until their mother, Mary Singh, returned from work later that evening. She chose her words carefully as she described what had happened, what she had seen, what Asha had worn, and what Asha had confirmed through her nonverbal responses. When Mary saw the blood-stained dress her daughter had been wearing, she fell silent, clutching the fabric as the weight of the situation began to settle over her. They sat in that silence for a while, each trying to process the unthinkable. Then, slowly, a plan began to form. First thing the following morning, Mary made a call to her employer, asking for permission to arrive late. She didn't give full details, just said it was urgent. Meanwhile, Anjali helped Asha get ready. Their youngest daughter, Priya, was sent off to school as usual, unaware of the full extent of what was unfolding around her. By 8 a.m., Mary, Anjali, and Asha made their way to the local police station. That morning, in the dimly lit room of a small-town station in Kerala, Anjali stood before a duty officer and gave her statement. Her voice was unsteady at first, but she was determined. She described Asha's condition, the blood stains, the distress, and the suspected involvement of their neighbor, Mr. Ramesh. But the officer's initial reaction was lukewarm. He listened, but with a kind of detachment that suggested this wasn't the first time he had heard such a claim, and that he wasn't in a hurry to believe it. "Are you sure?" he asked. "She's mentally challenged. Maybe she misunderstood something? Could she have imagined it?" It was a line of questioning familiar to many families reporting abuse. Subtle dismissal, delays cloaked in procedure, and doubt disguised as caution. A request was made for a written statement, then a referral to the duty doctor. But nothing moved with urgency. Still, Anjali didn't back down. What she may have lacked in experience, she made up for in resolve. She had seen the blood. She had heard her sister's wordless confirmation. She knew what had happened, and she wasn't going to let it fade into silence. What Anjali didn't know at the time was that her timing, though unintentional, would shift the course of their case. Just days before they walked into the station, a horrifying incident had gripped the nation. In a convent school in West Bengal, a 71-year-old Catholic nun had been assaulted during a robbery. The case sparked widespread outrage. Churches held silent protests. Social media erupted in anger. Newsrooms across the country demanded answers. The nation was watching. And under that kind of scrutiny, the police could no longer afford indifference. As Mary and her daughters sat waiting on a worn bench in the station's corridor, unsure if their complaint would gain traction, a senior police officer walked in. He paused when he saw the small family seated together. Asha leaning against her mother, looking withdrawn. Anjali nervously fidgeting with her phone. Sensing something was wrong, the officer approached the front desk and quietly asked about the case. When briefed by the constable on duty, his demeanor shifted. He glanced back at the waiting family, then turned to the officer handling the report. "Treat this matter with urgency," he said firmly. "Do you not realize the climate we're in right now? The whole country is watching. We cannot afford to be careless, not after what happened to that nun." His presence shifted the atmosphere in the room. Papers that had sat idle were suddenly picked up. A fresh report form was opened. The tone changed. Officers who had seemed disinterested moments earlier began making calls. The family was ushered in more respectfully, and Asha's statement, though communicated through limited words and gestures, was finally taken seriously. Anjali's report, which might have been buried in a less visible moment, suddenly took on new urgency. As details began to surface and community members whispered about what had happened to young Asha Singh, pressure mounted. The timing, though unplanned, became pivotal. Within hours, Mr. Ramesh was picked up for questioning. A formal complaint was registered, and the process moved swiftly, at least on the surface. Asha, still visibly shaken, was taken to a clinic outside town for a medical examination. The staff, aware of the sensitivity of the case, handled her with care and gentleness. She didn't speak much, her eyes vacant, her demeanor withdrawn, but her body told a story no one could ignore. The examination was thorough but compassionate. The doctors noted injuries consistent with recent trauma. And though Asha couldn't articulate the details, the findings aligned closely with what Anjali had described. It was enough to remove any lingering doubt. Something terrible had happened. The preliminary report confirmed that abuse was likely. The case, once met with hesitation, could no longer be downplayed or dismissed. The man once seen as a dependable neighbor, a quiet helper with a calm voice and steady presence, was no longer viewed as a protector. The illusion shattered quickly. His arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. For the Singh family, it was the beginning of a long and painful journey, one that would involve not just legal procedures, but also emotional recovery, therapy, and rebuilding trust in a world that had failed to protect their child. Anjali's decision to speak up became the critical turning point in their story. Sometimes, justice doesn't move because it hears the cries of a child. It moves because the world has already been stirred into attention, and in that moment, someone dares to add their voice. The case moved faster than most. Within a week, Mr. Ramesh was remanded in custody. Local news picked up the story, framing it quietly but firmly. Mentally challenged girl victim of assault, family seeks justice. Anjali sat quietly beside her mother when they saw the news scroll across the screen. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't closure. It was just movement. A step forward. For a long time, victims like Asha had no voice. But in the shadow of national anger, hers was heard, only because the world was already listening. Justice in India can be slow. In many places, it feels like time itself sleeps in courtrooms. But this case didn't drift into silence, not immediately. Thanks to public pressure, the investigation pushed forward. The local media kept a cautious eye, and for a while, the system appeared to do what it was meant to: listen, act, pursue. Mr. Ramesh was formally charged. The preliminary hearings began. The courtroom was small, worn with time, just like the people sitting inside it. On one side sat Asha's family, still reeling. On the other, the man they had once called uncle. The trial stretched on for months. There were adjournments, delays, and days when it felt like nothing moved. But the evidence, collected swiftly in those critical early hours, held firm. The medical report, Asha's behavioral changes, the testimony of her sister, and neighborhood statements built a case that was difficult to tear down. Mr. Ramesh maintained his innocence throughout, often silent, sometimes stoic. But silence does not undo harm. The judge listened carefully over the course of several sessions, and when the verdict was finally delivered, it came with measured gravity. Mr. Ramesh was found guilty. The court sentenced him to 20 years of rigorous imprisonment. In his closing remarks, the judge acknowledged the resilience of Asha's family and the broader significance of the case. He said, "This court recognizes not only the trauma inflicted upon Asha, but the courage of those who refuse to stay silent. In a country where many such cases are buried by fear and stigma, this family stood up. And in doing so, they have reminded us all, justice is not only the responsibility of the system. It begins with the bravery to speak." The sentence brought a sense of relief, but not restoration. What Asha had lost could not be retrieved. But for her family, and for many others watching, it meant something. Accountability. It meant that someone had listened. And for a brief moment, in a country overwhelmed by stories of delayed justice, this one did not disappear. The aftermath of justice brought no immediate healing to the Singh family. What they had endured left lasting scars, but the outcome provided them with something they hadn't had for a long time: some semblance of hope. In the wake of the trial, Anjali's role within her family began to shift. She had always been protective of Asha, but the trauma deepened her sense of responsibility. She became more attentive to her sister's needs, ensuring Asha's emotional and mental well-being was a priority. She took on a more maternal role, accompanying Asha to her informal school even if it made her late, sitting with her during quiet moments, and making sure she wasn't left alone with her thoughts for too long. Mary's work life, however, became more complicated. As the investigation unfolded, she struggled to balance her job with the increased responsibilities at home. Her colleagues and employers noticed her frequent absences, but no one questioned them. By then, everyone was aware of the reason, thanks to the extensive media coverage. Mary's life shifted in ways she had not anticipated. Her resilience, and the quiet dignity with which she had fought, earned respect. The public sympathy garnered from the case offered a form of validation she hadn't expected. A few months after the trial, Mary was offered a role at a larger store, one that paid significantly more and offered better conditions. With this new job, she could reduce her hours even further. Though life remained difficult and healing was still in progress, the Singhs finally had the resources and the time to rebuild. This time wasn't just about money. It was about presence. Time for therapy. Time for school meetings. Time for rest. Time to sit quietly with Asha on the porch just watching the rain. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living again. The road ahead remained long. There were still nights when memories would return uninvited, when silence would fill the room with the weight of the past. But now they had something they hadn't had in a long time, the freedom to hope. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes, subscribe to our channel for more real-life crime documentaries and fictional stories inspired by true events. We uncover the darkest corners of human nature, so you can be more aware, more informed, and maybe even safer. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something just isn't right.